Hey guys, welcome to the Impactus podcast. In a moment, you're going to hear from Chris and I as we kind of unpack one of the conversations he had recently. I know it's going to be a blessing to you. But before we jump in, I just want to let you know about our sponsor for today. The Canadian Bible Society have been serving people with the Bible for over 200 years, and they aim to make it accessible to everyone, regardless of language, age, or situation. They've translated the Bible into over 200 languages. Yeah, including, which is really interesting, all the Indigenous languages in Canada. They provide scriptures for various groups, including military, prisons, camps, nursing homes, and resources for all ages. They've got a few areas of focus like addiction and trauma and Bible engagement. And so if you're a pastor or a men's leader, we encourage you to check out their Overcomers course or the Bible course. These are two resources that are going to strengthen your men's group or your church. You can find out all about this in this incredible ministry over at biblesociety.ca. Chris, man, how's it going, dude? So good to see you.
Good to see you, Jordan. Yeah, it's been a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we were just saying off before the call that we haven't crossed paths even on Zoom calls very much lately. So it's just nice to touch base. What's been happening in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, we're working hard on content stuff for Impactus, obviously, and yeah, the kids are busy, and my wife, is busy, and it always feels like in the fall, school starts in September, and then you blink and it's Christmas, and so this fall has been flying by. Is that what it's like for you guys?
Yeah, definitely. We, with the three kids, it's busy.
Yeah.
Loving it, and it's a blessing, man. And actually, I'd be honest, as I listened to the podcast you recorded this week, I was just thinking of, the different challenges dads have, and we'll chat about some of that in a moment. But the challenges are just so different at different life stages. And yeah, I was just admiring how when the kids are small, they feel like big problems, but really in the hindsight, they can be really small problems.
Right. Yeah, well, and my kids are teens now, and so it is a whole different so we're navigating phones now, which, I didn't have to deal with a couple years ago, and that's a whole challenge, and yeah, the classic teenage, attitude and certain things. So it's all good. It's just all very different.
Yeah, I was thinking.
But I'm excited because I see my kids at this age. It's fun. So both my kids are going to be baptized actually in the next little bit. They've made that choice. And so that part is kind of the coolest part of the teenage years, all challenges aside, which are sometimes very challenging. But to see their faith become their own and to see them taking that seriously, you do all the stuff when they're young of bringing them to church and reading the Bible to them and praying with them and trying to teach them. And now it's at a point where we still do those things, but they're starting to own it a little bit more, which is very, very rewarding, very cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, the podcast you recorded was a little bit on some of those themes, right around the faith and holding on to it, and what happens when it starts slipping, and what happens when you have doubts. And so, tell our listeners who you interviewed and what that was all about.
Yeah, so I met with Nicholas McDonald. So Nicholas is a pastor down in Indianapolis. He's also an author, so he's written a new book called The Light in Our Eyes, and it's really from his experience as a pastor, and he's primarily ministered to young people, either youth or young adults. He was a campus minister for a lot of years, and so it's just kind of his story of experience of, as he ministered to young people, the questions that would come up, the doubts that would come up, the challenges, and sometimes the disillusionment is the word that he would use. The times where people would just question, not even necessarily Jesus or the Bible, but maybe the way church was being done or things that they were seeing there. And so just the challenges as we get older and start to wrestle with our faith a little bit more. What do we do when those doubts come? And what do we do when that's happening in our kids or in people in our church? How do we navigate that? So the book was awesome. It was such an interesting and refreshing read. And he just gives lots of really good practical insight to that, just from a guy who's just had a lot of those challenging conversations.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, listening to the conversation, the one thing that stuck out to me was this new term that I probably haven't used very much, disillusionment. And I thought, wow, that is really truly when I look around at a lot of the people that I had kind of defined as they're deconstructing, a lot of it, I believe, is just disillusionment, that
right.
There's still this optimism and hope about the person of Jesus and oftentimes the scriptures. But when it came to their experience of the church or the institution, let's just say,
Yeah.
they struggle. And I don't know about you, Chris, but when you've been a pastor, when you've seen people kind of wrestle and maybe not walk away from the faith, but maybe just kind of like drift a little bit, what are some of the predictable reasons that lead people to that, you think, from your perspective?
Well, sometimes it comes from just legitimate faith questions about the Bible or the truth of the Bible or the historical Jesus or whatever. So that does come up, and those are fair questions that we do have to wrestle with. I think maybe more of the time it's people who've just been hurt by
Yeah.
church, right? They've been hurt by people, and there's something that then says, well, if Jesus is so good, then why are his people acting like this? And it can trigger those types of questions as well. And part of it for me as a pastor is I would say to people, listen, like I grew up in a wonderful family. Like my parents were awesome, are awesome. I got a great relationship with my brother. Like we were a close knit family. My parents taught us to be good people and to follow Jesus, and so my family growing up was great, but it wasn't perfect, and I got hurt sometimes, and I hurt them sometimes because
Yeah.
that's what happens in family
Mhm.
sometimes, and so this is our church family, and it's inevitable when people get together that sometimes you're going to disagree, and sometimes you may get stung in there, and sometimes you may be the one doing the stinging, even if you don't mean to. That's part of what it is to be in family, and so I think sometimes people have been hurt, they've been stung, and because of that, it's just easier to maybe pull away, not necessarily from Jesus, but maybe from church.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that too, and I've also seen, like, intellectually and, like, theologically it happen as well, where maybe this one idea that they were told or trained as a young man, whether it's certain theological leaning or how the
Mm,
world is gonna end or, how different theologies around just way church is done and practiced, and they come to find out that actually maybe that was not as tight as what
right,
they had thought. For some, they think, well, this undoes all the
right,
scriptures. If this is true, then everything else can't be true, or if
right.
this is not as hard and fast as I thought. But what I find really interesting is that actually by looking at like the wider church, like looking across the world and how it's practiced, and looking at how beliefs are believed, obviously within the umbrella of orthodoxy,
Hmm.
there's a lot more for forgiveness for people to actually explore what the scriptures
For
actually
sure.
say about things. And so I think about one friend, and he had some thoughts. He was shocked to find out that some people believe, um, things around the Eucharist or things around like the rapture theology and things like that. And for him, he
Yeah.
was like, it was going to undo him. And I thought, well, hey, brother, lots of Orthodox people within the faith believe some of these things that you're wrestling with. You don't need to just kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater
Right.
and just kind of abandon the faith because of the one little view you had. Kind of you're struggling with a little bit. I don't know if you've seen that
Right.
at all, but
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And like I've had people say to me exactly that, well, if this isn't true, then the whole Bible falls apart. And my answer was always, but it doesn't have to at all. Like
yeah,
that logic doesn't track. I think the book of Acts is such a fascinating book for lots of reasons, right? It's the birth of the church and the moving of the spirit and all of those things. But what you see through the book of Acts is a group of really devout believers. Part of what they're doing through the book is really wrestling with their theology, right? Because Jesus came and changed everything. And so a lot of things that they held really tight to, they realized they didn't need to
yeah,
in on this side of the cross, and so their theology actually evolves throughout the book of Acts as they begin to understand Jesus with greater clarity, and so I think through church history, there's been denominational splits and all that over these things, and every denomination, every church has a faith statement, and every church believes certain things, but we were chatting just before we started recording. I teach at Tyndale as well on the side, and one of the things I have enjoyed about Tyndale is a really broad university. A common evangelical, faith statement, but all sorts of different denominations. And so, in any class that I'm teaching, there can be a wide range of views on things. Yeah, the rapture and the Lord's Supper, and spiritual gifts and church governance and all those things. And yet, when you actually talk to people who disagree with you, you say, "Hey, we actually agree on almost everything, and certainly the most important things." So there is some room for us to agree to disagree on some of these disputable matters.
yeah. It's interesting, right? Because in the podcast you recorded with him, you spent some time talking about how like what do we as dads or as parents do when our kids start becoming disillusioned with the faith. or with church or with whatever. And I think it's a really good distinguishing conversation to have, is to ask, well, what are you really disillusioned by? Like, is it
Right.
just this like one area of our theology that we've held for a long time, or is it one practice that we've been doing, or do you have serious doubts about, Jesus being a real person who,
Right.
died and rose again on the third day? And so I
Yeah.
don't know, I could see the temptation, Chris, of a father hearing that they're questioning, their faith a little bit, or maybe some of these things that we've just mentioned, and there could be this like sense of panic, right?
Right. Yeah.
But what I really appreciate about your conversation was this invitation to just journey with them rather than kind of get overwhelmed and overreact.
Yeah, it was great. Nicholas does such a good job answering that in the interview and throughout the book as well. I think part of it's just the acknowledgement that doubt is actually a pretty normal part of the spiritual journey. Like I think everybody has moments, right? Because we have what we believe and how we understand God, and then inevitably in real life something happens that challenges a view, right? It doesn't fit so neatly anymore into that, theological category that we put it in. And so we have to wrestle with that. And again, that's good. That's normal. God wrestled with Jacob, face to face, and some of it was over who Jacob understood God to be, right? They're wrestling as Jacob understands through the end and through the wrestling. Oh, God is the one who blesses me. I need God's blessing in my life. I've been trying to do it myself this whole time. And so there's lots of stories in scripture of Abraham and Elijah and Moses and Jonah and all these different people having these kind of wrestling matches with God over their doubts and over their frustrations and over their concerns. So again, God doesn't typically, get angry at people for asking questions. He's not striking them down for sharing a doubt or sharing a frustration. And so I think that's part of the encouragement for dads is, yeah, those moments of doubt and questioning are just normal. And it's good, actually. It means they're using their brains and they're trying to wrestle it out. We don't want to ignore those moments, but we want to listen really well and just kind of help them walk through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, man, if you're a dad, you got to listen to this regardless of the age of your student or your son or daughter. The last thing, Chris, before we move in, I just want to really attune people to and listen for is how he talks about how for years we have looked at the Christian faith as kind of like a ticket to heaven, and that's kind of it, right? Like just like I'm gonna pray this prayer, receive forgiveness, so that ultimately I get out of here at the end, and I, fire insurance, as I've heard some people call it. And he talked about how emasculating that idea can be for men. Can you just unpack that? Because I do want people to catch that before they jump in, so they can really hear it when it comes.
Yeah, and he's not underestimating how crucial that is, right? We want people to go to heaven. That's a big part of the gospel. His point is that's just not the whole gospel, right? That is the end result of the gospel, but the gospel is actually something that starts working in our lives right now, and there's a here and now aspect of it. And so when all you focus on is let's just get them to heaven, which a lot of us do in the evangelical church, we just really miss something beautiful about what Jesus is up to. And so so he'll take some time to unpack that in greater detail, but it is an important distinction for sure.
Yeah, it was really helpful to me actually as we talk about men and their uh, leanings and temptations and desires and drive and ambition. And so, yeah, overall, this is a great conversation today. I'm going to encourage you, please listen in. I believe it's going to be a blessing to you as you navigate your own questions, maybe, and your own doubts, give you some room to do that. And so, Chris, thanks for choosing him and choosing this book. And I think it's going to be a blessing to the guys that listen to it.
Yeah, let's get to it. Well, we are here with Nicholas McDonald, who has written a new book. Nicholas, welcome to the Impactus podcast. It's so great to have you here with us this morning.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
So for all the guys listening, tell us just a little bit about where you are in the world and what you're up to in life these days.
Yeah, so I am an assistant pastor at Redeemer Presbyterian Church, which is right in the heart of downtown Indianapolis. I've been married to my wife, Brenna, for 16 years now, and we got started right away. So we've got a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 3-year-old, 3 boys. So,
Oh, wow. So you're busy,
yeah,
busy, busy.
busy. Yeah, all the drama of a teenager and a 3-year-old in the same house.
Right. There must be some overlap probably in some of the behaviors, I would think.
It does. There's a little regression at 15, but it's okay.
You're right. Yeah, very good. So you've written a new book, and we're gonna get to the title actually in just a minute because it talks about issues related to the church and the term we hear a lot, which is deconstruction. And so lots of people are talking about that word. You use the phrase in the book. There's a mass exodus happening right now, particularly in the younger generation, as kids are hitting their teenage and young adult years. They are questioning their faith. They are sometimes walking away from church, sometimes walking away from Jesus. So tell us a bit about that term deconstruction, if you wouldn't mind. How are you using that in your book? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, one of my goals, that's a really important question. One of my goals, at least in that first chapter of the book, is to convince a lot of people not to use the word deconstruction unless they
Right.
really mean it. So when I think of someone who's really truly deconstructing their faith, of course, this is a postmodern phrase that sort of trickled down to us and changed and morphed in its meaning. And essentially, what it means is that you believe there's no truth out there. Truth is just established by people in power, and when I talk to most people who have left the church, that's not really where they are. They're not truly deconstructionists. They don't really
Right.
believe that there's no truth out there. In fact, one of those studies that I cite is showing, I think surprisingly to most people, that many people of the millions who've left the church would still say they believe that the Bible is God's word, still believe in
Hmm.
the atonement of Jesus. And so that tells me there's something else going on there that's not
Hmm.
quite deconstruction. Um, Maybe a popular picture that I hear a lot from people who are truly deconstructing would be that they'll often describe their faith journey like they are in a room that somebody else decorated, and they feel that it's their job to take the old decorations off of
Mm.
Christianity and put their own decorations on. That's a pretty postmodern, yeah, non-truth way to think about Christianity.
Sure.
I think that's a small percentage of people who've left. I don't think it's probably the large percentage. And so, um, oftentimes I will take a couple of different categories and suggest those to people who say they're deconstructing. And the one that people tend to latch on to most often is
Mm.
I will ask, well, are you deconstructing or do you just feel disillusioned? Do you feel
Right.
disillusioned with the evangelical American church? And I would say 90% of the time, people say, yes, that's what I mean. Not
Right.
deconstructing, but I feel disillusioned. I feel like the American church is it's gotten on board with a project that I don't feel is Jesus' project, and I'm not
Right.
sure where to go.
Right. Right. And it often does emerge in the teen years, right? And in your ministry as a campus minister and in your ministry in the church, you've had a lot of those types of conversations, right? And the book was full of them. It's one of the things I actually really loved about the book was you had just so many real life stories of real life conversations of kids who are maybe sometimes struggling with their faith, but more often maybe struggling with church or Christianity as a whole, not so much questioning Jesus, right, or his teachings or his way or the cross, as you say, but really struggling with how does this all work in this organization that Jesus also created called the church, right, that we're a part of, and what does that mean for us? So that leads us to your book itself. So you've titled the book "The Light in Our Eyes: Rediscovering the Love, Beauty, and Freedom of Jesus in an Age of Disillusionment." So there's that word that you would prefer us to use, I guess, as we're having this conversation. But tell us about the light in our eyes. Tell us about that title. What made you land on that? Where did that come from for you?
Hmm. Yeah, I stole that from Jesus. So,
Right.
he talks about how, if the things that your eyes are focused on are dark, your whole body will be dark. But if your eyes are full of light, your whole body will be full of light. And what Jesus
Mm.
is calling us to there is to be people of hope, people who have our eyes set on his dreams, not the
Mhm.
cynical dreams around us. And so, yeah, one of the stories I tell at the very beginning of the book is just, in a way that, some people are on board with, some people feel a little confused by. I start talking about January 6th and my experience of sitting there watching that, and seeing lots of people who are very angry here in America sort of marching into the Capitol, storming the Capitol,
Mm.
whether you call it an insurrection or not. And that became controversial after I published. A year later, it was rebranded.
Right.
So who knew? Apparently, it was a peaceful tour.
Right.
So we, but what I saw there is not so much, not trying to make a political point there, so much as to say oh, when I see people holding up signs proclaiming Jesus and they're very angry and they're very fearful, that doesn't surprise me. I grew up with that. That's what
Right.
evangelicalism looks like. So I just felt totally unsurprised by that moment.
Right.
And so should that be the culture that we expect when we walk into the church? I think sadly in the American church, that often is the culture that's there. And so in working with young people on a college campus in particular, what I began to realize is that I think, in the postmodern age, it was a debate 10 years ago whether we should embrace postmodernism or no. It just is the way we think now. We just are postmoderns. It's not
Right.
really a debate anymore.
Can you
Um,
unpack that word a little bit, Nicholas, just for our listeners, postmodern, as it relates
sure,
to the
yeah.
church?
I think a rejection of the idea that you could rationalize your way to the truth, just starting
Right.
with your head and then working down to daily life. And some people might see that as a bad change that we don't think that way anymore. I think it's just different. I think it's just
Right.
different. I don't know that Jesus was teaching people who are rationalists, he's
Right.
teaching people who feel their way through life. And so he tells stories and approaches them differently. And
Yeah.
and often, Jesus, I just said this to a student the other day over lunch, is Jesus' number one question for people by far is, what do you want? What is it that you want? He starts with
Mm.
people's desires. And so, what I learned on a college campus is that I worked with a lot of students who would say, I'm deconstructing or I'm disillusioned with the church. And they would have some objections that they might have heard from online voices, but I would answer their questions. Okay, here's the answer to your objection. Here's the answer to your objection. I could
Right.
see in their faces that's not really what they wanted. They didn't want
Right.
answers. And I began to learn I was answering the wrong questions for them. I think the
Mm.
questions were more, where do I find hope? Like, is there a positive vision for me to live toward, especially for young men? I
Right.
think something I was thinking about, since I think your podcast is geared toward men, is the vision of Christianity that I grew up with was deeply emasculating,
Yeah.
is that it gave me no real vision for the future. And so I think this is what a lot of young people are looking for is, hey, where can I find a group of people who give me hope for
Right.
life and hope for the future? And so I started to learn to answer their questions of, oh, I see. You're not looking necessarily just for me to answer all your objections. You're looking
Right.
to answer the question, does Jesus give me hope? And I think the answer is, thankfully and beautifully, yes, he does.
Right.
So let me bring you alongside me and how I discovered that for myself. And that's really
Yeah.
where the book came from.
Amazing. Yeah. And you talk about in the book, it's not that apologetics are a bad thing. It's just it's incomplete, right? For it, it is good to grapple with some of those intellectual struggles, but that's not the fullness of the good news, right? That's not the fullness of the life that Jesus promises. And so you've talked about there can be as people kind of maybe hit this season of disillusionment in their life, that it can come from sort of engaging in the church and struggles with the church. You talk about church hurt in there. It's like, so what kinds of things lead people to this time of questioning?
Yeah. Well, so in the book, I talk about two different cynical dreams that I think we have that I've experienced in my own life,
Hmm.
and they really both flow out of the same, I would say, incomplete message of the gospel. And the one would be, we can end up with this culture of exclusion in the church.
Right.
So I tell the story of being at a church when I was maybe 22, and it was my first job out of college. I was on the south side of Indianapolis. And the attraction to me was that we were working with lots of young men and women who were in kind of a trailer park surrounding
Mm.
the church. I don't know if trailer parks are a thing in Canada, but it's kind of
Yeah,
like,
for sure. Yeah,
okay.
they're here. Yeah.
So this was the appeal to me, is just working with at-risk students. Wanted to
Yeah.
do that. But as I tried to engage with those students, I kept bumping up against a theology that the pastor held that said, we don't really care about these students' physical needs or emotional needs. In fact, it was said to me one time, your job is to get them in here and get them saved and then get to the next kid.
Right.
And so I remember one particular moment, we were having an after school program,
Hmm.
and I was playing some Christian rap in the background. I was playing some Lecrae, who's going to be in Indy tomorrow, so we're excited about that here.
Yeah.
And so I'm playing that music, and I hear from upstairs the pastor, or I hear footsteps. I don't know it's the pastor yet. I hear somebody running like there's an emergency, and I meet the pastor on the stairs, and he just looks outraged. I mean, his face is beet red, and he
Hmm.
looks at me and he says, "Well, what is this crap?" And he's talking about the music.
Right.
And I said, "Well, I mean, it's Christian rap. It's what our students listen to is rap. I thought this would be a good kind of bridge for them." And he said, "Well, if I can't understand it, it's not Christian." And I thought,
Wow.
okay, unbeknownst to you, I think you just articulated the
Right.
Christianity that I grew up with. If
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't understand it, if it doesn't look like me, if it doesn't sound like me, if it doesn't
Right.
think like me, it's not Christian. And a lot of the things that we label as Christian are really just cultural values for a very particular group of people. Now, I'm an Orthodox believer. I'm
Right.
ordained in the PCA. There are some things that I would say, yeah, if you don't believe these things, you don't belong to the faith. But there are so many things that are just
Right.
cultural expectations and particular values
Right.
for this group of people that we've made into orthodoxy. And so, if I think about growing up in that church, in fact, in a beautiful way. Just a month ago, one of the students from that church, who was a high schooler at the time, read the book. I didn't know that she was reading it, and she said, "Oh man, this resonated with me. You
Okay.
helped me to articulate why I felt so disillusioned with the church in the first place. Is because
Right.
it was that culture of exclusion. If you're not like us in these particular ways, you're not Christian." Which is
Right.
really a form of just legalism. So it goes
Yeah.
all the way back to the New Testament. That's what the Judaizers were, right? If you are
Right.
not a Jewish Christian, you're not really a Christian.
Right.
So that's one thing I sort of have, discovered along the way is okay. That's not the vision that Jesus has. But the other side of the coin is what I call the gospel of relevance. So I
Mm.
talk about heading to a church when I was in high school. That is what we in the States would call kind of a health and wealth church.
Yeah.
So believe in Jesus and all your dreams will come true. And I just remember sitting in that church and hearing the pastor tell me that Jesus wanted all of my dreams to come true. But thankfully, one of the things this church did was we took a trip to South Africa and encountered real poverty for the first time. Now, unfortunately, we were promising people that they could escape poverty like that if they had
Right.
faith and Jesus would heal all of their wounds instantly. And, so there were some flaws, but it also exposed me to the fact that, wait a second, um, there are people in this little village that I'm talking to who are Christians and they're believers, and God is not as interested in making all of my dreams for them come true, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it threw off my categories. And then returning home just 2 weeks after that was when I found my youngest brother had died in a drowning accident in our backyard. So I
Mm.
found him. I was part of that whole horrible, horrible day. I just thought, okay, if Jesus thing is wanting to fulfill all of my dreams about life, he's either doing a terrible job or he doesn't care about me or he doesn't like me or he doesn't like those people. And it's about the time when I left the church, was sort of moving from this culture of exclusion, which felt unfriendly, to a
Right.
culture of relevance, which felt very friendly, but it had no substance. And I
Right.
just thought, well, if that's the church, I'm out. So that's how I
Yeah.
experienced it, and I see that in a lot of other people today.
Yeah, yeah, and I was so heartbroken to hear that story of your brother, which you included in the book, and you share so much of yourself in this book, which I really appreciated in your own journey. And so, in all of these different kind of streams of the church, I appreciate when you're talking about, introducing Lecrae to your kids that you're ministering to, and you're just doing what every generation has done, which is trying to understand the gospel in light of the cultural moment that we're in and where our people are at and all the rest and to kind of get slapped down for that. And I've seen that legalism as well in the church, but really, so the overarching point of your book is there is a better way, right? It doesn't have to be that we remain in disillusionment. It doesn't have to be that we walk away from church or walk away from Jesus. It doesn't have to be we go into those two extremes of legalism or relevance. So what is that better way? And it's Jesus, obviously, but what does that mean as you kind of unpack it in your work?
Yeah, it is Jesus, and yet it's a Jesus who is proclaiming a different gospel than the one that I grew up with. I would say the thing that both of those experiences in my exclusive church and in my relevant church had in common is that there was a sense that the really good news of the gospel was that Jesus wants to help us escape the earth to go somewhere else.
Right.
Um, which is very, I don't know how common that is in Canadian evangelicalism. It's very much the vibe of the church in America. In fact, it was going abroad to a different country, to England, where I met people who described themselves as evangelicals, who would not have articulated the gospel that way at all. That I realized, oh, maybe there's something interesting and unique and maybe not great about the way that we articulate the
Right.
gospel in the States. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear if that trickles over into Canada or.
Yeah, and I mean, and realistically, a lot of what happens in Canada is influenced by the very large and powerful nation to our south. So we share a lot of culture in those ways, but I've seen the same thing, and I also I grew up in a word faith church for a little while growing up and saw that side, and then in a more legalistic church, and I've had some of those experiences too, and like you, through some overseas experience, realized the gospel is shared in different ways, which you don't know till you see it, right? You think what you grow up in is what it is, and then you go, oh, there's a whole world outside of my little bubble that's doing this differently. So you talk about, actually, I chuckled in the book about the whole the Bible acronym, right? Basic instructions before leaving Earth, which is what we were
Yes.
taught in Sunday school growing up in Canada, I guess, as well as in America. And again, there is some truth to that, but maybe not the whole focus. And so for the guys who are listening, who are maybe they're in this place of questioning or disillusionment or frustration with the church or church hurt or whatever, what would you say? Like, what do they need right now more than anything? Like, what can we do if we have a brother who's struggling along in that way, or if we ourselves are struggling along? Where do we go? What's next? What's a good step we can take?
Yeah. Well, I think for men especially, it's important that the gospel gives us a vision for life.
Right.
And so the gospel, I would say, behind those two false kind of ways, false cultures, would be at least the gospel I grew up with. And I grew up in a Missouri Synod Lutheran church, which in many ways I'm very thankful for. There's some things I still
Hmm.
really cling on to. Great evangelists, great at spreading the gospel, have a high regard for God's word. Appreciate all those things. But every sermon I heard growing up was something like, well, here's all the things Jesus would want us to do, but let's face it, we're never going to do any of that stuff. So good thing he died for us at the end.
Right.
That way we can go to heaven. And something I have been thinking about, because I've been on a few podcasts talking to men in particular who seem to resonate with this, is that is an emasculating gospel. As
Mm.
your life doesn't matter, there's no vision for your future. The only vision for your future is a day in which everything you're doing in your life, your very work, your vocation, does not matter. It has
Right.
no eternal impact, because the goal of Jesus is to help you escape the world to go elsewhere.
Right.
And what I began to learn in my experience in the Church of England, and the Anglican Church there, which has its own things today, but
Sure.
is that I was introduced to this resource, the Book of Common Prayer,
Yeah.
and one of the things they do every single day is they will pray the prayer of Zechariah, who speaks about the gospel in very different terms than those. He does not speak about the gospel like it's this invitation to escape the world, but he speaks about the good news of Jesus as though Jesus has come to heal the world,
Hmm.
beginning with me, right?
Right.
So he's come to heal everything, starting with me. I'm a sinner. I'm broken. I need healing and restoration. And so does everything else in the world. Jesus cares about it all. And what I began to realize is that the church that I was in England was much more humane and really did have a positive vision for here's what it looks like as Jesus followers to engage with all facets of life.
Right.
The way we care for our home, the way we care for our family, the way we care for our jobs, the way we care for our finances, our the environment. There's just this very holistic way of thinking about what it meant to be a Jesus follower. And I think just as a young man, I left the church because the church didn't give me that vision. It was a blank canvas of, I mean, no wonder we would say, yeah, just go accomplish your dreams. Jesus doesn't care. Well, in the gospel of escape, yeah, those dreams have nothing to do with Jesus. So
Right.
just go eat, drink, and be merry and do what you want. Or
Right.
exclude people in Jesus' name. We'll just make the gospel about our own personal project. But I think the gospel is much better news than that. I think it gives us hope,
Mm.
obviously, for the resurrection and the future, but also hope that Jesus is up to something in our lives right now, and he can use us to do that
Mhm.
good work of healing and restoration.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, and I appreciated also throughout your book the focus on beauty, right? This really is a beautiful Lord and a beautiful message, and it's interesting just the way you frame that for men, because I think, like, in our context of men's ministry, we often use the picture of, when God creates Adam and Eve, he takes Adam, he puts him in the garden and says, "Now work it," right? Like, do
Mhm,
something. There's a
mhm,
task for you to do. It's not just that he's gonna walk with the Lord and worship the Lord and do all those things. And as I understand scripture, that's actually not what heaven's going to be like either, where we're just sitting
mhm,
around and worshiping. That'll be no doubt part of it. But even before Eve shows up on the scene, right? Even before marriage, even before fatherhood, which are other things we talk about in men's ministry, the man was created with something to do, right? There was a participation and a partnership. So God does all the heavy lifting of creating, and then Adam's job is to steward it and work it. And so I do think men are craving that, right? Give me something to do beyond
mhm,
just thoughts and prayers, right? Or beyond just the good intentions of trying to save your soul so you come to heaven with us. Like,
mhm,
give me a task to do. There's a
mhm.
garden to tend, right? And I think that applies in the new creation as well, right? There is something for us to do with the Lord.
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, the Hebrew word there for work the garden, is the word for serve, which is also the word for worship. So
Mm,
the line is kind of thin, So that's the same phrase that would have been used to talk about the priests in the temple to
right,
serve it and to keep it. And so we think of worship as something that happens on Sundays,
right,
but imagine a world in which God is calling us to worship Him through the things we do to care for the earth and the world around us. I mean,
right.
it is
Yeah.
this really, I think, yeah, wholesome picture of what worship is that I think I was missing. But
Mm,
I think you're exactly right. I think that's what Jesus offers us,
yeah.
from the beginning to the end of the scriptures.
Yeah, amazing. So you've obviously, over your years of ministry, as we said, you've had lots of these types of conversations with students who are going through their struggles. No doubt conversations with parents, I'm sure, along the way as well, whose kids are in those places. So for all the dads out there who are listening, who maybe their kid is in this place of questioning, or maybe their kid has walked away from church, or whatever, who's, the dad who's worried and concerned. I think one of the things that, again, I really appreciated about the book is, it's easy in those fearful moments for us to maybe get more controlling, or again, try to argue their way through it. But you suggest sort of a more positive and proactive approach that isn't so fear based. And so, what would you say to the dad out there who's worried about their kids who are in this maybe disillusioned season?
Hmm. Well, I think first, that's really hard to be a dad watching your
Yeah,
kid struggling with faith. And in a lot of ways, your anxiety makes sense. That comes from your love for your child. So
yeah,
I don't want to say I'm glad you're anxious, but I'm glad you care enough to
it's
be
a good
anxious.
sign. Yeah,
Yeah, so that makes sense. Um, I think, though, that part of what high schoolers or students who are disillusioned are looking for is they're waiting to see if you panic.
mm,
They wanna see if you're secure in your belief. Um, and oftentimes, unfortunately, I think young people are met with a lot of anger and anxiety, which to them just reads as insecurity, and
mm,
so it makes whatever you're saying not credible.
right,
Um, and I think when we hear, like I said, your young man might describe himself as deconstructing. My first job is to say, "What do you mean by that? Maybe it's
right,
not. Maybe it's not what you think." And so, something I will say to parents all the time is, your first several conversations about this topic need to be you having the goal of being able to say, "Okay, I think this is what you're articulating to me. I think this is what you're saying. you could even use the first chapter of my book that's free online to look at those
Hmm.
5 categories. Where do you fit into this? Which one of
Right.
these are you just having doubts because that's a different thing than
Right.
disillusionment, which is a different thing than deconstruct? Are you saying you've departed from faith altogether? Like, so
Right.
many things we can mean by that. And so asking, okay, let me help me understand where you're at. And then something else I've discovered. So one of the stories I tell in the book is about a young guy named Michael, who just I think is the prototypical, just like ambitious, lost young guy who feels disillusioned with the church. And he was one of those students that I met with for years, and just he had these very big intellectual questions, and I would answer them, and he would just look disappointed.
Right.
Until one day, he was talking to me about he was a painter, and so he was talking about, well, I really shouldn't be painting. I should be doing things that are more Christian. Uh, he's like, but I don't want to do those things. I want to paint. And so
Right.
we walked to his favorite spot on campus, which was at a rooftop. It was fall. I remember it was really beautiful.
Hmm.
Just looking at the red and the yellow and orange leaves all over the town of Columbia. And I asked Michael, so you don't believe God cares about your painting, but look at all this. Look at everything that God has made. Like, it
Right.
seems to me that God enjoys beauty, and it seems to me that
Hmm.
God enjoys this creation. And so I asked him, what in your gospel would make you think that God doesn't care about your painting? Like, tell me what you think the gospel is. And what he articulated was the gospel of escape. And I'm telling you, even if you have not taught your kids this, even if you tell them every single day that's not the gospel, there's something about our culture that just gets it into their heads
Right.
that that is what the gospel is. I have it with
Yeah.
my own kids all the time. I say, we don't say going to heaven, kids. It's not, heaven is coming to earth, the
Yeah.
resurrection,
Right.
but we still say that phrase.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, in our house, right? And so what I discovered is, oh, well, yeah, well, Michael he's disillusioned with the gospel because that was his gospel. He didn't really understand what the good news was. And as I
Mhm.
articulated this idea that, well, what if Jesus actually is really interested in this world and he really is interested in your painting, your
Right.
vocation, and your calling, and maybe he's part of that. He's not separate from it.
Yeah.
And what if the gospel is that Jesus wants to heal the whole world beginning with you? And just after 2 years of fruitless conversations, just tears running down his eyes. Just like,
Wow.
yeah, that is what I thought. I thought the good news was that Jesus didn't care about my body or the world, but you're saying it's the opposite. And it was
Right.
this really transformative moment of realizing I should have just listened better over the last 2 years and asked better questions. But I think that is the place to start with our young men for sure.
Yeah, what even the great example of that story, that was the hope coming back
Mhm.
into him, right? That there is a vision now, there is a way forward where I don't have to quit this, I don't have to walk away, and that's yeah, again, just the emphasis on beauty and the listening, right? Just the listening and asking the right questions. There's lots of examples in the book of just great questions that can be asked in those types of moments, and even as we talk about this age of disillusionment and the mass exodus from the church, you also talk about it like it's not all bad news because you talk about there's a rearranging that's happening in the church. So what do you mean by that?
Well, I have seen a lot more young people walk away from the church over the last maybe 5 to 7 years than I've ever seen, which is gonna be really hard.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of them through good conversations after I sort of learned over time how to have those conversations, come back feeling very renewed in their
Yeah.
faith. They're able to name, I think, some of these things about, well, I feel disillusioned with the church. I believe this gospel of escape. So as we work through those, I've seen a lot of young people find a real renewal and new zeal.
Mm.
Um, One of those examples, one of my favorites is a guy named Joseph that I worked with for a couple years here at Redeemer, and super sharp guy, kind of a big, muscular, intimidating dude who is way smarter than me. But after
Mm.
a couple of years of conversations, it was interesting. One of the things we talked about a lot was this idea that the gospel is embodied, that Jesus cares about your body, he cares about your life. And one of the things he would say made all the difference to him after a couple of years was not just our intellectual conversations, but it was the fact that he attended our church at Redeemer, where we practice communion every week and we
Mhm.
practice a confession of sin and a assurance of pardon. And he said, yeah, all of our conversations were great, Nicholas, but it was actually having that embodied experience every single week of
Right.
Jesus sort of wrapping his arms around me and saying, this is my body, this is
Yeah.
my blood, and hearing a pastor say, Jesus loves you, in spite of all of your sin. He has mercy on you because of all of your sin. So that was really the thing that I was
Mm,
looking for. And so watching him experience that renewal was really beautiful. It took him stepping out of maybe that more toxic evangelical escape culture and finding something different.
right.
But I would say that was the Spirit is leading
Yeah.
him out of that culture into somewhere else. And I've also met many, many young men who do feel like, in fact, I'm meeting monthly with an artist here at the Harrison Center. We're attached to an art center, and one of the things
Mm,
he will tell me, he's not a Christian, he's left the church a long time ago, but is very interested in Jesus. We've read the Gospels together several times. Is he is very afraid and anxious about the cynical vision of life that the world is offering. He just
right.
feels like it's wolves tearing at wolves. And
Yeah.
so he is looking for a different vision to live from. And I have seen many young men come to faith because they see whatever secularism is offering to me is not satisfying. It's
Right.
not even cohesive. It doesn't make any sense. And
Right.
I do need a positive vision to live from. And I think if you can be a church that says, yeah, Jesus has that, he actually has a
Right.
positive vision, not a cynical, fearful vision. I think there's a huge evangelistic opportunity. So I've seen many, many young people come to faith over the last few years, and that's exciting.
Yeah, are you seeing we're noticing in Canada, and it's being talked about in the church here, of young people, especially young men, coming back to church,
Mhm.
and no one's quite sure why, but I think you're actually articulating a pretty big part of it, that there is just either a different way we're talking or different questions that we're asking, or we're becoming better listeners, or whatever the case may be. But we talk about it in the men's ministry, that we're just seeing this, and it seems to be across denominational lines, like it's happening in the evangelical church. We were talking to an Orthodox priest who was saying the same thing in his church. Like, there's just, their
Yeah.
men are showing up, and they are, as you say, they're looking for more. They're recognizing that even some of those loud, secular male voices that are saying this is what it is to be a man, there's something, yeah, just deeply unsatisfying to the soul about it, as popular as they may be. And so, again, to bring it back to the obvious sort of Sunday school answer, where we really do believe Jesus is that
Mhm.
answer. And really just bringing men back to that core. And you talk throughout your book about it. It is good news, right? It's good
Mhm.
news. It's a good message. It's hopeful, and it's a way forward, in a really beautiful way. So, yeah, Nicholas, I'm going to ask you to pray for us in just a minute, and pray for the guys who are listening. So the book is The Light in Our Eyes by Nicholas McDonald. If guys are looking for you online or looking for the book, where can they find you? Where can they find it?
Yeah, you can find it. You can find the book anywhere, any place you go, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Target, wherever. Um, you can find me at my Substack is the Bard Owl, BARDOWL,
Okay.
and I write, and I've got some free resources on there as well. My only social media platform these days, I've cut everything else out, so that'll be a place to find me.
Yeah, I've cut it out too, and my soul is very happy to have
Mhm.
lost that.
Mine too.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Nicholas. Thanks so much for writing this book. I really loved it, and I think it's such an important conversation to have in this cultural moment that we're in, and the moment that the church is in. And it brought me a lot of hope and encouragement, and I think it will to a lot of the guys as well. Would you mind praying for us as we close off today?
Good. Yeah, glad to. Lord, thanks so much for the fact that you are a God of hope. You are a God of light. You bring truth into our lives. We do pray for those young men who are wrestling and older men who are wrestling and not finding satisfaction or beauty in the secular vision of life, that you would continue to draw them into your church, your ancient, global, beautiful church. For those of us who are disillusioned listening right now, would you give them a sense that there's something else out there, that there is a positive vision for living that you offer
Hmm.
to them? And would you meet them in ways that heal them and heal the broken places around them? And we ask for that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, God bless you, my friend. Thank you so much for taking the time with us.
God bless you, Chris. Thank you.